Welcome to the Pre-to-Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre-to-Post Transplant Podcast, where you get to tell your side of the story. This is Jenny McFarland, your host, and today's episode is fantastic. I got to interview a lady named Tasha, and she's going to come on and share her transplant journey with her pancreas and kidney. And we also talk about another topic that we don't talk about very much, and that is the caregiver. And she goes through her journey with her husband / caregiver and the challenges that they had to overcome and that they're still overcoming. And I think that this is a great episode because a lot of people don't realize that transplants aren't just about the recipient. There's also the caregiver, and the caregivers, they do so much. They're there to help the recipient make sure that they have everything that they need. And sometimes caregivers don't really focus on themselves, and it takes a toll. And so this is a great episode because it just reminds us that being a caregiver is hard, and it's just as important as being a recipient. And so I don't want to give too much away, but I just want you to remember that if you're not a transplant recipient or even really in the transplant world, that caregivers are just another part of transplant, another important part of transplant. And so if you are a caregiver out there, just remember that you are facing just as much as your transplant recipient is. And remember to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your loved one. So just real quick, remind you to like and subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating and review, visit the podcast website at www.pretopostx.com so you can hear all the episodes, and send me a message if you want to be on the show. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the episode, and help me welcome my guest, Tasha De-Ponte. Hi, Tasha. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm glad that you're here. So I want to ask you to tell me when you had your transplant, where you had your transplant, and why you needed one.
Okay. I'm a recent SPK transplant patient. So my transplant was done at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, and it was done this past April 25th of this year, 2023.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, explain what an SPK transplant is.
Oh, so that is a simultaneous pancreas kidney transplant. So I needed both a kidney and a pancreas.
Okay.
So I did it at the same time.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And when or why did you need to have that done?
So I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 3 years old, and I was not a very good teenager. And I started to
think anybody is.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so I wasn't the greatest. And then in my, I'd say early 20s, mid 20s, I found out that I was spilling proteins and I had some kidney damage. And despite my best efforts, I had reached renal failure and needed to start dialysis when I was 31.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Wow. So that was kind of late. So you had diabetes for a really long time. So what kinds of things started happening to lead you up to dialysis?
Well, I know initially I just felt really fatigued. Like I noticed I would need to take naps more often, and I don't think I really attributed it to my health because I've always been on my feet. I've, gone to school and worked simultaneously. At that time, I had just gotten my massage therapy license. So I thought, oh, just doing that physical labor in addition to an office job I was doing and just being a young 20 something always running around, that maybe I just needed more sleep. Um, so the fatigue was the first one. And then it wasn't until I had gotten married and we had thought about having kids is when I really had to start paying more attention to my labs and, oh, you have to watch out for, your GFR levels. So yeah, it was mainly the fatigue, I'd say.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how did you take it whenever you first found out that you're probably going to need a transplant?
I don't think it had initially hit me. I think like a lot of us, or I assume like a lot of us think, it was bound to happen. So
Yeah.
we were incrementally prepared for that, but I don't think until I actually had to get my um, graft in my arm was it
Yeah.
until then that I noticed like, hey, this is a reality that is coming true very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so how long were you on dialysis before you actually got your transplant?
I was on dialysis for 4.5 years. And I
Okay.
honestly feel that if COVID hadn't hit, I probably would have gotten transplanted sooner.
Is that
So,
because I know that during COVID, a lot of transplant centers kind of held back on giving transplants unless it was like a dire need. Is that
mhm.
why you think?
I believe it's that in addition to just, how everyone was mandated to stay home. So a lot of the
Yeah.
workforce was not there. So I know, for instance, Mayo was behind, I think they were saying almost 2 years. So my initial referral was back in 2020.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so I know it was a whole myriad of issues, but yeah, I believe in my personal opinion, it was that
The
COVID
only
just
thing
ruined everything.
yeah. The only thing I could say that may have been a positive out of that is some people who got their transplants during COVID had to go through that by themselves. Like they
Mhm.
couldn't have a single visitor, anybody there with them. And I've talked to a couple of people who have went through that, and I think back to my transplant, and I'm like, there's no way I could have done that on my own. So I mean, maybe that was just a positive that you could take from that. I don't know, but that's what I would think.
Yeah. Funny story. I actually, so when I had finally gotten transplanted, which this may be jumping the timeline a bit, but my caregivers, so my husband and my mother came, they had gotten COVID. They had visited me prior to getting transplanted. Um, and then they had given me COVID. So I didn't know I was COVID positive until the day after or 2 days after surgery. And so I had no visitors for like
Oh,
pretty
you
much
didn't
the
get any
whole,
anyway.
yeah. So yeah, I was just stuck
Forget
in
what I
either
just said.
position.
Scratch
No, no,
that.
no, it's okay. You didn't know. But yeah, that was yeah, that COVID still happened to me. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from too. That it
So
would have been nice if they could be there.
they didn't test you first before your procedure or before transplant?
Mm-mm. I think because the COVID protocols were kind of scaled back and they we were vaccinated. Um, some people wore masks, some people didn't. Yeah, and I think just with all the data and the new vaccines or the boosters
Yeah.
out, it was kind of, you get COVID. We have
Yeah.
measurements to go through, but it was still not fun.
Yeah, I guess now it's probably more lax. I remember I haven't had anything done, thankfully, in a long time.
Yeah.
And but before anything, like you had to get a COVID test to do
Hmm.
anything.
Hmm.
And but that was back, in the day when COVID was dangerous. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I guess that makes sense because they don't really I mean, I know I know they know that COVID's still there, but they probably don't take as many precautions as they did before because of the vaccines and stuff.
I agree.
So, so okay, so you're on dialysis for a
Mhm.
really, really long time. And you're finally ready to get on the transplant list.
Mhm.
How long was it while you were on the list? Or I'm sorry,
So,
how long were you on
no,
the
no,
transplant list?
no problem. So I had actually, so once I found out my GFR had hit 20, I had done some research and found that you're able to list yourself. So to avoid having such a long wait time, I did that in my home state, which I live in Hawaii. They actually had a pancreas and transplant program. So I was like, great, I don't have to go out of state. I can stay home, save some money, be close to family. So I had listed there initially just for kidney because I needed to lose a little bit more weight for the pancreas, which they required a lot of centers.
Yeah.
So I had done that, I would say probably around 2017. Yeah, around the time we'd gotten married. So I was on the list there 2 extra years ahead of everyone else. And then they disbanded their pancreas program because the surgeon left, which um, was good and bad. Good in the sense that I found that they only have done 1 or 2 pancreas transplants. So it would have been better to go somewhere else
Yeah.
with a more well-versed provider. Bad because it didn't occur to me to list elsewhere. So I kept my kidney listing at in my home state in Hawaii, and I knew that I did not want to wait the 5 to 7 years that Hawaii's wait list was. So I went and listed at the continental US. So my next place that I listed was in Washington, where my mother lives. Um, Initially, I tried to list for both again, kidney and pancreas, at uh, University of Washington, but I didn't meet their pancreas weight requirements again. And so I tried Virginia Mason, and I was able to list there. But something had happened with my paperwork, so it was only kidney, which was fine. At least I could accrue wait time there. And then pretty much from the time I started dialysis, 2019 to about 2021, I'd listed at a bunch of other places. So I had listed at OHSU in Oregon, Oregon Health Sciences University. My cousin lives there. Um, I had attempted to list it at UCLA. Um, but at the same time, I believe that's when Mayo Clinic had called me to get in because they had finally processed my referral. So I was like, I have some distant relatives there, so I'm just going to try that. And Mayo's well renowned, so I
Yeah.
listed there and just kind of forgot about UCLA. So I was at a few different places.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
when you listed in all these places, were you moving at the same time, or were you allowed to just list there and stay where you were?
No, you're correct. The latter. I was able to list there and stay where I was. With Washington, it was easier because my mother she lived there. There was a permanent address. The other places, where my cousin lived in Oregon, her address was permanent, but she was kind of in flux because she was a college student.
Oh, okay.
Um, Arizona was a little more difficult, but they had said, we can let you know when, after you've been tested and evaluated and approved, to kind of let you know where we think you stand. I know there's not like a list, but if you need to move sooner because something becomes available, we can let you know. So we had decided, once we were approved, that we would potentially move to be closer for that phone call. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because everywhere else I've heard, they've always said, you have to be within a certain amount of time at the
Hmm.
hospital for when you get your call. And living in Hawaii is really difficult to
Yeah.
probably get there if they call you in the
Yeah.
middle of the night,
Mhm. Yeah. I think I tried to also want to say coerce them, but let them know that I was serious and that there were options. So I told them, I know I live in Hawaii. It's like a 6 hour, 5 to 6 hour flight. But these airlines have these flights on these certain days. So if I get a call at this time and I need to leave, I can get there by this time. So I tried to make it as seamless as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, for them to try and at least get me on their list, to show that, it's doable and I'm serious about it. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay. So did you end up moving? Oh, you said that you did end up moving closer to the center, right? Eventually.
Yeah, well, funny story. So I had gotten a call from OHSU in January, and this was January 2023. And this was maybe 5 months after getting listed in at OHSU. So I had considered moving then, but with that first call, it was the provider said, it's a 50-50 chance. It's up to you if you want to take it. And after kind of consulting with my family and my husband, I decided, I've been waiting this long already. I'll just wait until something with a higher percentage rate comes through. So after I declined that, it was radio silence for at least, yeah, until pretty much until April. But a little before April, when you get that first call, I'm not sure how many calls you have gotten, but you're kind of on edge. So,
I only got the one.
oh, you got one. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I got
Yeah.
lucky.
So, yeah, no, that's great. Um, but even just waiting for that one phone call, right? You were
Yeah.
still very on edge, very excited, but nervous. So, after that call and the radio silence, like after a few weeks, I was just an anxious wreck. I was like, should we just move? Should we stay here? I don't know what to do. Um, and I think just after consulting with everyone, financially, it wasn't quite feasible. We also have a dog, so I didn't want to burden any family or even just have to keep her boarded up for that long. So we decided to stay. And then April came from Mayo, and they had called, and this is the second call, but I actually didn't get transplanted, I think, until the sixth call. There is a lot of calls.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't quite, I should remember them, but I know there are more than five, but the first one was from OHSU. The second to the fifth or sixth has been from Mayo. So the second call from Mayo was a flop. And then the third one was, okay, this one may be serious. You might want to consider packing. The fourth one was, okay, you need to come now. So that fourth one, it was on a dialysis day. It was a yeah, dialysis day because I was waiting to have my chair time at 5 p.m. And I told them, should I just leave? Like, can you dialyze me when I get there? They're like, yeah, don't worry about it. Just make sure your flights can add up. So we found a red eye ticket. There was a major hiccup at the airport where they didn't process the payment, so we almost didn't get the ticket.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think we're like, well, we need this ticket. Can we just buy it here? So they were able to process it for us before their gates closed in like 15 minutes. So we were able to jump on the plane. We got to Arizona that evening. The next day they dialyzed me and they're like, oh, there's a laceration on this kidney. It's a no-go.
Oh
So
no.
yeah. So we're like, okay, we're in Arizona. We should just wait. So that at that point we decided, okay, we're just gonna temporarily move since we've gotten so many calls. Um, and then I had another call after that a few days later. That one was a no. And then finally the last one, on the 22nd, was like, yeah, this one looks good. Just, we have to ask doctor, we have to run some tests. And the following day, they're like, okay, this looks good. We're gonna get you registered and yep, on the 25th of April, they did it.
I mean, that's just crazy. Like
Yeah.
when I hear of these stories where people have all these dry runs, and I'm like, what an emotional roller coaster like you have to be going through, especially if
Hmm.
living in Hawaii and if to jump on a flight and get there and then it doesn't work. Like I can't imagine. Like that is so it was so emotional the one time that I did it. And I was like I just I couldn't I don't even know how you guys handled that. Like
Yeah,
do you ever get
I
to the
don't
point
know.
where you're like, well, yeah, they called again, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that fourth call or so when they're like, you need to come, that
Yeah.
was that was like flight or fight mode. Like we're like, okay, we gotta go. The only thing that really stressed me out was my dog because she's 14.
Oh yeah.
And I had tried to get my brother so we live on Maui. And my brother lives on Oahu, which is where Waikiki and all the
Yeah.
touristy hotspots are. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna buy you a ticket to fly over and stay with Kenai, my dog, and then you can take her back home the next morning. He's like, yeah, 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 I'll do that, of course. So I tried to buy the ticket, and the airlines updated their system. So I was not able to buy a ticket for him. So I had to go to the airport. Thankfully, I live close by, purchase a ticket for them to say, oh, wait, no, we have to refund you because he's not even going to get here until 3 a.m. And I was like, well, I'm going to be gone like at 9. So at this point, I had to just leave that plan out. I had to leave my dog at home. I mean, I left some food, water, I had the AC on, I had the TV on, but I was just so sad because I was like, oh, this emotional like roller coaster of having to pick up and leave. And then I
Yeah.
have to leave my dog unattended. Like it was a mess. It was
Yeah.
a mess.
I couldn't imagine. I had
Hmm.
a dog. My dog passed away last year, but she was very old.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, I'm
she was very
sorry.
small and
Yeah.
I, I like that's a big problem in transplant. A lot of people have animals and
Hmm.
they don't have people to take care of them for like
Hmm.
extended periods of time. And it's just really like a sad thing. I wish that there were more programs that could help people, but
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
So you didn't get that transplant. You didn't get another one, but you finally got your right call. And
Hmm.
what was that like? Like when you were going in there, were you excited and hopeful, or were you kind of like, well, we'll see? Like, were you worried that it wasn't going to happen again?
Yeah, pretty much. I think because of the pseudo calls, like, oh, I don't want to get my hopes up. Like, I know it's going to happen, but I just, based on past events, I don't want to assume this is going to be the one. So I was just open to the possibility of it being a go or no go.
Yeah.
Um, so they had dialyzed me. I was pretty much just waiting to go home after that session, and they're like, "Oh no, actually, nope. We're gonna you're gonna go into the surgical suite." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Um, then let's go." And I think at that point, it still hadn't hit me. Like I was just there to be there. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but yeah, I at that point I was just like, okay, it's gonna happen. I'm not excited, but I'm not scared or nervous. It's kind of just something that I have to do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so how did the surgery go? Everything went smoothly?
Yeah. For some reason it didn't, and I don't know if a lot of the surgeries are geared more towards kidneys because they don't, I'm sure like lungs, they don't do a lot of pancreas transplants. So it didn't register to me that it would be a midline cut on the middle, so kind
Oh,
of
okay.
from my sternum to like the start of my pubic bone.
Yeah.
So recovery was difficult. That part was really difficult. With COVID because I had a really nasty cough that didn't help,
Oh, yeah.
the
That was painful, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
didn't help that part. So with COVID, I actually had to stay in the hospital, or I wanted to stay in the hospital a little longer because my caregivers were wanted to make sure they were also in the clear. So I wasn't discharged until about day 7, I believe.
Okay.
Hmm.
And so is it usually more common to get out sooner than day 7 for kidney pancreas?
Yeah, I think they wanted to discharge me either at day 4 or 5. They're like,
Okay.
"Oh, you can walk well. You seem to be doing fine." I mean, my appetite wasn't back, and I was still a bit constipated because all of the meds, and they
Yeah.
had moved my intestines around during surgery. But I was like, no, I don't feel comfortable going home right now.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I know when I was in the hospital, um, I only had to stay for 11 days, which is good for lungs.
Oh. Hmm.
And like I was ready to go home, but I like physically, but I wasn't ready to go home emotionally because I
Hmm.
was afraid that I was going to screw something up, you know.
Hmm.
So that was why I mean I still went home, but I was just terrified to go
Hmm.
home and take care of
Hmm.
myself. And I didn't have
Hmm.
well, I mean, I had my husband's a nurse, my mom's a respiratory
Hmm.
therapist. Like I had everybody that I
Oh.
needed, but I didn't, nobody, none of us knew anything about lung transplant before. So
Hmm.
it was scary. But
Yeah.
so, okay. So let me ask you, like, how was it having to do it by yourself? Because, I told you, you didn't have to do that, but apparently you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I th even though I was by myself in the hospital, I think because I think I could handle it because I still had the nurses there. There's still the providers coming in. My husband and my mom and my family would be texting or calling. I actually liked it being alone because I think I was in so much pain and uncomfortable. I
Yeah.
didn't want to talk to anybody.
Okay.
So that reprieve was kind of nice. Yeah, so it for me it was doable. It was totally
Okay.
doable. When I had gotten discharged, a lot of the burden fell on my husband
Yeah.
and my mom. My husband was more so the, I guess you would say, the nurse. I could bathe myself and use the bathroom and toilet, but as far as the drain, so I still had a drain in. He had to do the measurement and the descriptions, the blood pressure checks, the medication management. He did all of that, most of that for the most part. And I think because I knew that I had someone there to do that mentally, I kind of just focused on myself, meaning, trying to deal with the pain and then using the bathroom when I need to. So I was very lucky in that sense.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you bring up your husband, and that's something that I know you mentioned that we wanted to talk about was relationships and caregivers. And I don't know if you still want to talk about that with the issues that you had to go through with your husband who being your caregiver. Um,
Yeah. No, I
but
think that's totally important. Or
yeah,
just any caregiver.
yeah. So I want to hear about like the challenges that you had and he had and how that strained your relationship.
Hmm. Well, upon us meeting, he knew that I had some health issues with the diabetes, and then the kidney disease came along, and then the renal failure. And I think for the most part, even though there were episodes that happened, like I would become hypoglycemic, or during dialysis, I had an incident where, one of the bandages came off and blood splurted everywhere, like a Dexter scene. So he had, experience in that part, and was well versed. But I think in the caregiving aspect, there's a different type of burden. So whereas before I could kind of hide my illness and tackle that burden myself, during transplant, he was taking on that role primarily. And it's one thing where if you deal with it your whole life, like my mom with my diabetes, you kind of get used to it, kind of what to expect. So she was okay in that realm, but my husband, I think because this is something new and he just had a lot of worry around this uncertainty, which we all did. This is new to everyone. That kind of that in addition to how I was feeling did not help our relationship at all. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure how. others have felt, or like such as yourself, being on the high dose of steroids right after discharge and then just this influx of new meds, but it had really altered my personality. Luckily, it was just for the month, but that's not to say that there was, you know, lasting damage done because of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it altered my personality. If it did, nobody told me. I didn't really feel like it did. Could have, probably
Mm-hmm.
did. But um how were you? Like how did your personality change?
I think I was just very short fused.
Okay.
So I became very sarcastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know there was no yelling or anything, but I would be very sharp with my words. And yeah, words, even though they're just words and not physical, they're still very cutting.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
And did you realize at the time that you were doing that?
That's a great question, Jenny. I think I knew that what I was saying, but at the same time, I didn't think it was as severe as it was.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew what I was saying, but yeah, I didn't think it was that bad because I was stuck in my own head thinking, I'm the one who went through surgery. I'm in pain.
Yeah.
If I were in your shoes, I would, for lack of better words, be more accommodating. And um, on hindsight, that is not a very nice thing to
Yeah.
think. But just in that time, I think I was just so focused on my pain and everything that it was difficult to see others around me.
Now that you mention that, I feel like I did have a personality change. I don't know if it was prednisone induced or not, but I
Mhm.
remember thinking after my transplant and even like during the, pre-transplant during that time where I was, going through testing and stuff,
Mhm.
I kind of I don't know if it was a personality change, but I kind of felt like, I'm going through this right now and I'm
Mhm.
gonna make it's about me right now. And I didn't
Mhm.
really it's not that I didn't care about other things that were going on or other people's problems, but at that time I just didn't. I was like, this is me and this is how I feel, and I'm not going to worry about what is going on with anybody
Mhm.
else because right now I'm trying to take care of myself. And I think after years and years after, well, it's only been 5 years, but
Mhm.
even till today, I am more um so it's weird because I feel more grateful and I feel more appreciative of life and things,
Mhm.
but I also feel more like it's so hard to explain. Like I feel
Mhm.
like I'm gonna put me first more often than I always did
Mhm.
my entire life.
Mhm.
And I care about people, but I'm gonna care about myself a lot
Mhm.
now too, whereas I didn't before. And as I'm explaining this to you, I know that it's not really what I'm trying to say, but I'm just saying like the transplant changed the way that I think about
Mhm.
things in multiple ways, and it
Mhm.
changed the way I think about myself. And I don't know if it's prednisone, probably not, but I my personality did change
Mhm.
just because of the traumatic event that I went through. I'm sure it does for everybody
Oh
in
yeah.
some way at least.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I feel also that if it hasn't changed you, then you must be some super person because there's no way that something so traumatic and uncommon can. So yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. So so you were having this hard time, and you weren't yourself for a while,
Hmm.
and your husband was having a hard time dealing with that and also taking care of you at the same time.
Hmm.
Did he ever voice that, hey, you're you're being different, you're not, your personality's changed, you're being short fused? Did he ever tell you that, or did you guys argue about that or anything?
Eventually he did. So I knew something was wrong just by you know, his face or how he, acted during the day. Like he would sit outside by himself, for instance. So as I had gotten better and the pain kind of subsided, I was able to do more things on my own. I took more of it took more time away from myself so that I could focus on or notice other people. So, I had noticed some little changes. So I had brought it up to him, asking if things are okay. And that's when we had the discussion that, you're not yourself and it's not nice feeling unappreciated during this time. And I think generally he felt like that because I'm an overall fairly cup half full, happy person.
Mm.
Um, and just to see this total different side of me threw him for a loop, even though there was a rationale to it that, oh, she is in pain or she is on medications. You can only use that excuse for so much, right? There has to be another section for personal accountability. But in any case, we did have a discussion, and when I felt independent enough and my mom was still there in the background too, I said, I think it would be better for both of us if, you just go back home, you kind of focus on your own self-care, and then I can deal with what I need to hear. I'm capable enough. My mom's here that you can just do that. And I know that may sound like I'm putting him in a bad place by telling him to leave, like, oh, he must be selfish just leaving his wife who just had surgery. But you know i'm I was brought up to be more independent, and I was comfortable enough and cleared by my providers, in addition to having my mom there, to where I was able to let him focus on himself. And I think that's another important thing that caregivers need, is that burnout is very real, just like how us with our chronic conditions is
Yeah.
burnout is real. So they need some time also to themselves. And we came to a compromise that it would be best for him to do that. So he had left just a week or two shy of me being discharged. So it wasn't much longer. Like, we weren't apart that long. Yeah. So he had
When
gone
when
during
you
that
say being
time.
discharged, do you mean discharged from the hospital or discharged to go back to Hawaii?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yep. Discharged from I guess not from the hospital, but from their care,
Yeah.
from transplant, so I could go back home to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so he left, and it was just you and your mom. Um,
Hmm.
did he, when he got back to Hawaii, what was he able to take that time and kind of get what he needed over there to where you guys could, reconnect when you went home? Or how did that go?
Yeah, so he had some time to kind of disconnect from the caregiving aspect. And he doesn't really have any health problems. So it's just more so, trying to get that mental load off. So he was able to do that and get back to work, which also helped with clarity of mind. And once I had gotten back to Hawaii, I actually stayed with my aunt who is on Oahu for a little bit before I moved back home to Maui. And yeah, I mean, we're still working through the kinks of what happened in Arizona, because it was a very traumatic event for both of us. And yeah, I mean, we're still together, but it has definitely affected our relationship.
Yeah. Well, I'm, of course, I'm not there, but I'm sure it's
Mhm.
probably maybe a little bit easier now because he doesn't have to physically take care of you. You
Mhm.
are obviously doing better. So hopefully, now that that part's done and you guys are both working on getting stronger, maybe things can go back to normal, hopefully.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think the other part that also scares him is that there's, just like us, we don't know, or we always have, like, on the back burner, that fear of organ rejection.
yeah.
So I think with him, there's always that fear, also that fear of, oh, if that happens and this whole thing is going to play out again. And there's that aspect that we're not quite over with, and trying to appropriately deal with. But yeah, it's just something you have to work with and hoping that time and professional help will help
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. And I will say, and you've probably already heard it, that your first year after transplant is the toughest year
Mhm.
because you got all these, your body's trying to figure out like what the hell's going on,
Mhm.
and you're going to have all these challenges probably. And when you say professional help, I was going to ask if you guys were getting professional help because the first year always has something.
Mhm.
And then I was also going to tell you to tell him, he might listen to this, I don't know, but I've heard some people mention about, they're worried about the rejection. And I had
Mhm.
a really close friend that I was a personal trainer for a while, and
Mm.
she was one of my clients, and she was always afraid of going into rejection, and
Mhm.
she's like a lot. And I would always tell her, right now you're not in rejection and you're able to be out here and exercise and you're able to live your best life right now. And if you spend your time worrying about what might not even happen, then you're gonna waste this time that you do have and that you are alive. And
Mhm.
so don't worry about whether or not you're gonna go into rejection. If you do go into rejection, then you will cross that bridge when it gets there.
Mhm.
Maybe you'll get another transplant, maybe not, but nobody knows. So it's not here now. So just don't even worry about it. Don't even think about it. Of course, that's
Yeah.
harder than it is. It's harder. It's easier to say than do. I even have my own
Mhm.
issues with that. But like just live your life like you're not ever going into rejection ever. So
Mhm.
there are people who last 20, 30 years on transplant organs. So
Yeah, no, that's a very good way to see things. And it's true. It's just like not even it doesn't even apply to just us, like to everybody. We don't know what's going to happen, so it doesn't serve any purpose for us to dwell on the what ifs.
right.
Hmm.
You're just gonna waste your good time that you have.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I was gonna ask you, are you guys two questions? Are you guys going through professional counseling to try to work through this?
Yeah, we are currently. I mean, I've kind of gone individually here and there, just even for non-relationship things, like little things like, oh, I don't know if I should take this new job.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've gone on my own and I've seen how helpful it can be. So I had introduced the notion to my husband and he was a little bit, reluctant at first because there's always stigma of, you know, seeing a provider for mental health or counseling. But, it's just like your brain is an organ, just like any part of your body. If it needs a little bit of help, that's okay.
And also I was gonna say, and I don't know if you guys know of any, but there are caregiver support groups out there. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's just as good as seeking professional help because you have somebody that you can talk to.
Hmm.
So, I don't know if he's looked into that, but I'm sure if he did, he would find some. And even if it's just online or even through Facebook,
Hmm.
um, when I was going through my pre-evaluation for pre-transplant, I found
Hmm.
some Facebook groups for transplant. And there was a couple out there that I was really able to get questions answered, and I didn't feel so alone once I got into those. And I found them right before my transplant, and I wish I had known them before. So
Yeah.
maybe direct him into that direction, and that completely leaves you out of it, and he can have like a place to go and vent or get advice or talk to somebody about it, and it might be helpful.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, it's only been a few months since you had your transplant, and you look fantastic. So, how are you
Thank you.
feeling?
Um, when I had gotten home, I would say from mid-June to about August, I had like this odd rush of energy. And then after that, it kind of tapered. And I don't know if it's because I had gone back to work
Yeah.
towards mid to end July. So I didn't quite have that energy, which would be great if we didn't have to work. We just spend our time
Yeah.
cooking good food and going out, but
Yeah.
alas, not our reality. So yeah, my energy is not as high, but I definitely for the most part feel better. Um, I'm sure as you can relate, when I was fluid overloaded and I love water, that water restriction on dialysis was like the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
So being able to breathe while being able to drink copious amounts of liquid was such
Yeah.
a godsend. Like I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just that and having more time to do things because my day would be from 7:30 till 4:30. I'd go to work and then 5:15 would be my chair time and I wouldn't be done with dialysis until about 10, depending on, how long they take to hook you up. And then I'm crazy. I went to get my master's degree at the same time. So I would do homework in between the gaps. And that would essentially be my days, my dialysis days. My non-dialysis days would be either housework or doing my homework. So yeah, having all this time, I have to refine myself and my hobbies. So
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah, it's not to say that there aren't challenges. Like I switched from tacrolimus to Envarsus, which is just a longer acting tacro.
Mhm.
And so my prograph levels dropped a lot and that really scared me. So I freaked out. So there's always that issue of adjusting your medication doses. But for the most part, yeah, especially being a diabetic since I was 3, that I it's great not to have to keep your brain on 24/7 and think
Yeah.
about, oh, it's super hot outside. Is my blood sugar going to drop? Or I always need to have candy in my bag. Yeah, just having that mental load or mental burden taken off is a gift in itself.
I bet. Yeah.
Hmm.
It's crazy how like the pancreas and kidney transplants, you guys have diabetes and then you get your transplant and you don't have to really worry about that. And then for the rest of us who don't have that, we get like lungs or hearts or whatever, and we start taking prednisone, and then we become diabetic. Like it's
Oh,
crazy how
yeah.
it doesn't do that to you guys. So
Hmm.
that's crazy.
Hmm. Yeah. But there's still that worry of getting type 2 diabetes too. I think some of the meds they said can
Yeah.
trigger that, which I'm just like, oh, and it seems difficult. Like now that I am able to exercise more because I have more movement and I can breathe easier. Yeah, I just even with that, I'm noticing, yeah, it's still kind of hard to lose weight. So I have to be even more mindful. So it's kind of reverting back to that diabetes diet where I keep it more low carb, high vegetable and fruit, protein. Well, not too high proteins, but
Yeah.
a good balanced meal.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I'm grateful that you are doing so good and you're one of my what I call newbies because you just barely had your transplant. So
Yeah,
you have a whole new long life to live ahead of you and I just wish you the best. And
thank you.
I do have another question for you, but before I
Hmm.
ask it, I just want to make sure that we covered everything that you wanted to talk about as far as your transplant or your
Hmm.
relationship, or if there's anything else you wanted to mention.
No, I mean, yeah, it's been a crazy ride. And I think just, you know, in any relationship, transplant or otherwise, you know, keeping open lines of communications and being honest in your feelings with each other is so important.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think that you just answered my last question was going
Oh,
to be,
sorry.
no, no, that's okay. It was going to be if you had some advice to give to somebody who's in a relationship and they're going through a transplant and you have your caregiver who it might be struggling a little bit, like what would be your advice to them to try and, you know, to try and help get through that?
Work through it. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty much just finding what you need on an individual basis and then coming together to see what you need on a couples basis and trying to work through those kinks and just trying to keep an open mind, open mind in terms of understanding and being empathetic to the other person and not just yourself, and open-minded to trying new ways of learning new things to better yourself and your relationship, because that'll help you in all aspects. I mean, communication, having open lines of communication works in the greater social world too, at work, with friends. So yeah, just keeping an open mind and being empathetic in the process.
For sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Perfect. Well, and I also wanted to say, to caregivers, we talked a little bit about it, but if you're getting ready to go through a transplant, just know that being a caregiver, your caregiver, it's hard. It's hard on caregivers, almost as hard as it is on the patient, because they have all these things that they're learning with you. Sometimes they might feel helpless because they can't help you like they want to help you, especially with pain or whatever. And so encourage your caregivers to get some sort of support, whether it's just somebody they can talk to, whether it's professional help or a support group or something, because caregivers have it hard too, just as much as we do as recipients and patients and stuff. So I thank you so much for coming on to share your story. I think it's going to be really great for people to hear about your story. And like I said, I wish you the best, and I wish you a long, healthy life. And I'm a little bit jealous that you live in Hawaii, but that we didn't get into that. That's okay. We probably don't need to.
Well, it's a little humid right now. It's like, it feels like it's 92, so don't be too jealous.
Okay, well, thanks again for coming on, and I will talk to you soon. I hope that you have a great day.
Thank you, Miss Jenny. And it was nice to meet you, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, you're welcome.
Great. Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Pre-to-Post Transplant podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.